Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, Hollywood South may be heading south now that the legislature acted more harshly than expected on the movie credits programs. Is there time for a hero to ride in before the final scene? Or is the state better off with a new law as modified? We'll take a look at this as well as some of the other winners and losers from the legislative session. We will also discuss what was learned in the gubernatorial debate in Jefferson Parish and what a judge had to say about Tom Benson's mental state. Our Future Watch segment updates the World Trade Center redevelopment, and there are more changes coming at NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. On the beat for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Clancy Dubos, political editor, Gambit Weekly. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter. And Gordon Russell, managing editor for investigations, The New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go to Gordon first and talk about the film tax credit legislation. The tax credits have been cut back, and the governor actually signed it. So
he just signed it just now
gone.
Today. Yeah, there was a big move by the film industry to get the governor to veto the bill. They're saying that it's going to really throw the industry into turmoil. He signed it, and the central piece of the bill that's the most controversial, I guess, is that it not only sets a cap on the amount of film tax credits that the state will approve each year at $180 million. There's a little bit of a controversy about how this will play out and whether it's even legal. Under one interpretation, the state will not be honoring credits or has the potential to not be honoring credits that it's already granted to people, in essence, pulling out the rug from under investors. The author of the bill, Joel Robideau from Lafayette, he says that's not right and that this is only going to apply to tax credits granted in the future, starting July 1st when the new fiscal year starts, so that anyone making a film will be under these new rules, essentially. And that'll be probably up to the State Department of Revenue to sort out. And if they, depending on how that goes, there could be a lawsuit or something if people feel like the rules have been changed in the middle of the game.
So any savings that would be generated by this new legislation, we really wouldn't see necessarily in this coming year.
Well, that's something I don't totally understand. I've tried to understand it, but I mean, they're counting on some savings from this bill in this current. This is one of the things they did to close this $1.6 billion fiscal gap, and I think they might have been counting on $70 million in savings or something like that. But if this has an effect only on credits granted in the future, I'm not sure how much money it's actually going to save in the current or in the upcoming year, because these credits are often, there's a lag time between when a film is made, when the credits are generated, and then when the credits are actually used.
And the issues that Gordon just outlined really, in a bigger picture sort of way, really show just how hectic it gets in the final days, because this bill was the subject of a conference committee report, as were, I think, all 11 of the revenue bills. And it shows why people say, making good government is like making sausage. It's messy, and hopefully the end result. Except unlike sausage, I'm not sure that this bill is going to please anyone. As far as I can tell, the original proponents of the bill, who wanted to expand the applicability of credits for Louisiana filmmakers and Louisiana composers and screenwriters, they're not happy because they feel that the interpretation of the cap is the one that is unfavorable to almost everybody. And that is to say, it's capped on the back end. They're saying, they say that what the law really says is the state will only honor $180 million in credits a year, regardless of how many are actually certified. It's a two-step process. Your credits get certified, and then they get redeemed. They're saying the state will only redeem $180 million a year, regardless of how many are certified. And I don't think there's any cap on how many are certified, which is part of what's the problem with the program to begin with. So I think Gordon's right. There will be some litigation on this, regardless of how the Revenue Department interprets the law. So and then it's a question of whether the whole thing stays. Yeah, exactly.
Well, everybody wants to know, are we in danger of losing the film industry?
I think it's too early to say. I mean, I think if this thing turns out to be a total mess, that's possible. Although I think if it's a mess in the way Clancy's predicting, maybe the law will just be thrown out. If it does what the author intends it to accomplish, which is to just we've been spending about $250 million, give or take, on this program each year, and this would cut it back to $180 million. That's not that drastic of a change, and I think the film industry could live with that. It would mean that our industry wouldn't really grow. It would remain at or a little bit smaller than where it is now.
And the important thing is this year, the year that we're still in for the next 2 weeks, the film credits were expected to cost the state about $226 million. The reason they're saying it saves $70 million is because they were projecting that in the next fiscal year, which it would cost $250. And Gordon's right. There's a lot of ambiguity, or at least disagreement, as to what it means. And in answer to your question, Errol, I think it depends on how it's interpreted. And assuming there is a court challenge, and I think that's a very high probability, depends on what the courts rule. If we somehow survive and have it at 180, whatever that interpretation is, it will remain, but it won't be as robust as it has been in years past.
And we haven't had a cap before.
We had no cap. That's correct.
Some examples of who buys these tax credits.
Yeah, this is not just about Hollywood producers. There is a cottage industry in Louisiana of film tax credit brokers, and those people make lots of money brokering these tax credits. But you look at some of the entities that buy these tax credits, like Entergy, I'm told, buys a fair amount of these tax credits, because a company like that has a pretty significant tax burden to the state. So if they can save 15%, you pay about 85 cents on the dollar for the credits. So if they can save 15% on their gross tax bill, that's a pretty significant savings. So it goes beyond films. It affects a lot of our local industries and businesses as well.
But have studies shown that this is benefiting the taxpayer on the whole?
No. I mean, every study that's been done on this in Louisiana and the ones I've read elsewhere say that they don't work, that we spend a lot more money than we get back. And of course, the film industry disputes those numbers, and they've underwritten some studies that have more optimistic findings, but they are underwriting those studies. And they usually get these. They say the program makes money by, for instance, in Louisiana, they're attributing a lot of our tourism to the film industry, and if you do that, then suddenly the program pays for itself. But I mean, I think other people would say we had a pretty healthy tourism industry before we ever had a film program.
I think it's kind of hard too to look at what industry is impacted by the film business too. Can you look at every caterer, every makeup artist, is there any way to connect all the dots to this?
I mean, you certainly
probably
can't.
Is, yeah, but it's
you
not
can't
that easy.
exactly, but I mean, economists use these standard models that have inputs and outputs, and they believe they work. I'm not an economist. I can't say whether they did, but I don't know that a film model is so different from anything else they model.
Lynn, we need to move on to beyond film, because other things happened in the legislature
This
this
film
session
needs to
too. Yeah, and so you did a great column, "The Winners, the Losers," which you do every year. So why don't you tell us a few of each?
Well, it's one way of looking at a legislative session, and there are lots of ways to do that. But I've been doing for over 30 years now the winners and the losers, and the big winners this year were higher ed and healthcare, because they went into the session under such pressure and, frankly, very vulnerable, because it was very unclear what the governor was going to recommend and whether the legislature was going to go along with it. Interestingly, the legislature did not go along with what the governor suggested on the front end. The SAVE Act, which passed on the final day, in the final hour, or hour and a half, was something that came up sort of midway through the session. It got passed, and higher ed got funded at the current level for next year, as did healthcare, which in today's standards, that's a great win, because they'd been cut every year significantly, and they were looking at drastic cuts. Democrats, a big surprise. You would think that a state with a Republican governor and no Democratic statewide elected officials and Republican control of the House and Senate, how can you expect Democrats to win? I didn't, but on the issues that matter to Democrats, like marijuana reform, domestic violence laws, paycheck protection, raising the cigarette tax, those are all bread and butter issues for Democrats. They won all of those issues. And Republicans wound up, not all of them, but a lot of Republicans in the legislature wound up voting for tax increases, which leads to asking the question, what does the GOP stand for these days? So on the loser's side, the big loser is Governor Jindal, because his three main topics that he introduced on the opening day, which is passing a religious freedom bill, didn't happen. Rolling back or scaling back, eliminating actually the state rebate on inventory taxes, and repealing Common Core. None of those three things happened. So he has to go down as a loser. Plus, he didn't really engage in the session until the final 2 or 3 days. He managed to save, but he had to kind of give away the farm by cutting a lot of deals, which he denied, but every governor cuts deals in the capital outlay program.
Also, I think I was going to say the save thing really, the debate over that, I think, was pretty embarrassing.
It really should have been, and I think ultimately it hurts Grover Norquist. Although he won in Louisiana, I think as Bob Mann pointed out in a recent column, he's going to lose in the long term. And the other big loser is big business. LABI in particular, the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry. I wrote in my column in Gambit, when a Republican governor rails against corporate welfare on opening day, you just know it's not going to be a good session for big business, and it wasn't. And I really like Steve Waguespack. I think he's working hard and doing a good job overall for LABI, but I think if this was just not business's year, and it was just, there was going to be a lot of pain no matter what, and I think legislators just said, you know what, it's going to be easier to tax business than individuals. And that set the stage. And LABI lost just about every major fight that it engaged in, which is, again, surprising in a Republican state.
Right. Not a good year for smokers either.
No. Well, maybe if some of them quit, it
Right,
might not
that's
be
right.
a good year.
On the night the legislature ended, Jindal had a press conference and declared a victory. So,
Well, George Bush said mission accomplished. What do you expect Bobby
so where was the
Jindal
wins
to say?
for him?
He's George Orwell would be proud of Bobby Jindal. That's all I can say.
All right, Clancy, thanks a lot for that overview of the winners, the losers each year that we hear from Clancy. Okay, over to Dawn now. Future Watch and World Trade Center, are things moving along there?
It is moving along, and we've talked about redevelopment of that World Trade Center site at the foot of Canal Street several times over the years on this program. It looks like it's getting farther ahead than any previous plan, and maybe actually will go forward. There's a lease agreement signed with the city now between the developers who are making a Four Seasons hotel and condominium project there at the foot of Canal Street. Aside from completely revamping the World Trade Center building, they also will be renovating Spanish Plaza, which is the plaza and the fountain that overlook the river. I was actually up there eating a snowball yesterday, and it's the tile's a mess.
Really?
It's kind of really shoddy
So it's
for a
repairing
beautiful
that they're
place.
gonna do?
They don't know what the final look will be. There will be new retail added in Spanish Plaza area. A whole change up. They hope by the end of this summer, the developers hope to have a final plan and a vision for what the building will look like. They're doing some due diligence now, just figuring out the bones of that building. It's divided. If you look at it, it's kind of a perfect X, and that it is 4 wings in that building. With an elevator shaft in the middle. So they have to figure out how to build around the infrastructure that's in that building. There has been a lawsuit filed by one of the losers of the folks who were hoping to get the deal with the city on that. Right now, an injunction has not been ordered by the judge, so steps are proceeding ahead, but there's still legal wranglings that make it hard for the current development team to get complete control of the property, secure it, and start doing some kind of strategic interior and exterior demolition to start construction. They hope to, by the end of this summer, have some of that construction going on with full-on construction of the new building or the new facility by the 1st of January. It's going to be about a 22-month construction project if all goes perfectly, and they've promised the city it would be done and ready by December 2017 to be ready for the 300th anniversary of the city. They're also working right now in the background on what they call a very complex DBE strategy, disadvantaged business enterprises. It's about 35% of their business has to be with minority and women-owned businesses, and they are hoping at the end that this project will create a model for other large development in and around the city, both on economic development issues, DBE issues, and aesthetics, of really bringing a brand and making it fit into the city. It would be the first Four Seasons, obviously, here, but it's a lot of stutter starts right now with the legal issues, with building issues. They're also talking, obviously, to their neighbors, the aquarium, the ferry terminal, trying to mitigate whatever trouble there is when there's construction going on, giving people access still to that part of the city and making the construction not be even more, we talk about construction being a nightmare everywhere. Hopefully in that area of town, people will be able to get through and still have access to the river and the businesses around there.
And remember a few weeks ago that the announcement of yet another set of development plans upriver from Riverwalk. This was in land that was going to be convention center land, and that too is going to have a hotel. So there must be a whole lot of confidence in this area developing.
I did read a report in a travel magazine this week that New Orleans was second slowest only to New York in terms of adding new hotel rooms in a city where there's a lot of demand. That despite the fact that we've come back so far, there hasn't been enough new building, and New York City and New Orleans are behind on that. So there apparently is the demand for more.
Is there a feeling that New Orleans' demand, that the tourism, the tourist trade has increased a lot? I used to be on the board of the Convention and Visitors Bureau and was on it when Katrina hit, so I've seen the darker days. But I noticed in recent years the numbers are trending up. Do they expect them to continue trending up like they have been?
They expect them to continue trending up, and the tourists who are looking for this higher dollar place, the bigger, larger, fancy hotel rooms and the bigger, larger, fancy condos right there on the river, they feel that there is a market for it.
And that's what they're building, I guess.
That's what they're building.
All right, Don, thanks a lot. Over to Errol now. Some more changes announced in the future. NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune.
Well, there were like two sets of news involving the Picayune this week. One was this merger. When the Picayune did its cutbacks a few years ago, we heard about something called NOLA Media Group, which would be the immediate operator of the Picayune. And then this week was announced that it was going to merge with Alabama Media Group and become Southeast Regional Media Group. And Ricky Matthews, who was sent here to head the operations here, and it was a tough job for him. I don't think he's enjoyed his time here a whole lot, but there's a lot of reaction to the movement. But Ricky Matthews will be heading it. It's unclear where this is going to be headquartered. We know there's going to be a shift to the printing operations in Mobile later this year. I did email Ricky Matthews, and he said he'd be going back and forth, but he said he's going to maintain his office in New Orleans. And so how much time he spends in his office, but at least it sounded like he was staying there. But when he talks about the web and about hits and gives you all kind of figures about that. And so the emphasis is clearly on that, and you would think less on the print operation. But the other story actually was Kevin Allman in Gambit Weekly did some good reporting this week about some more cutbacks, that some of the hierarchy within the Picayune talked to staff members and told them that there are going to be some cutbacks that are going to go pretty deep. Clancy, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, I had heard a few things, but Kevin has followed that story since 2012 when the original scale back changed Gordon's career and many others. And it's pretty glum right now. The newsroom, Kevin has a lot of friends over there, so do I, and it's sad, but I, as someone who owns a newspaper, I understand why Advance or Stephen Newhouse feels he has to do this. But it's still sad for a city to see its daily newspaper slowly withering like that.
So
we do have the Advocate. One of them, no,
it's not the daily
older
newspaper.
The
one thing that was curious,
there's new life. So
yeah. One thing that was curious is I remember in the original announcement, Stephen Newhouse talking in general about his perceptions of the media and saying that the real interest is in sports and entertainment and keeping that up. And apparently, again, this is secondhand, but we're hearing from the discussions that they were saying that some of the cuts were going to be in sports and entertainment.
And deep also.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
deep.
And so it's going into there. And so the whole, as dramatically as there have been changes in this thing that we grew up, we called the Times-Picayune, it seems like there's going to be a whole another wave. And we don't know how much is going to be merged, shared responsibilities between people in New Orleans and Mobile and copy editing and all of that sort of thing. And one thing that Kevin Allman actually reports in the story is there seems to be a redefining of beats. One thing that newspapers could do better than anybody else is have beat reporters, because they had more reporters, and CK the reporter who was a real specialist on the beat. And as you get thinner, you don't have that many specialists anymore, and they're covering a wider range. And so we seem to be seeing a diminishing of that.
The coverage gets shallow.
Yeah,
that's a real loss to the community.
Even though I always quick to say there's still some good talent there, and there's still people there putting out a good newspaper, but you just get the feeling that there's, well, we know there's some major changes coming.
They missed an opportunity, though. People who go over to the Florida coast are fond of going to a bar called the Floribama. They should have called this new site Nolabama. I think they would have tapped into a real wellspring of support
Okay,
there.
we got to move on now. I'm heading back over to Gordon. And Tom Benson won one legal battle.
Yeah, a big win for him this week. I think everybody probably thought this was the way that things were going to go. It was a really high bar for his disowned relatives to meet, which was to get a judge to decide that he was essentially incapable of making rational decisions. And I can't remember if the legal standard, you might know, Clancy,
It has to be
clear and
declared
convincing.
incapable of managing his own affairs, his business affairs, and personal affairs. You're right, it's a very high bar.
And so, it's sort of like, I guess you would say, he didn't have to find that he was competent, but just that he was not incompetent, which is sort of like not guilty versus guilty. And it seemed like the judge actually went further than that, and he even said in his ruling that Benson was, quote, able to make reasoned decisions as to his person and his property. I think this thing, it was an interesting case. The media wasn't allowed to watch any of it, so we had to sort of follow it from afar and then pick up bits and pieces from the players in it and from the judge's ruling. But there were a lot of witnesses, 12 witnesses, including 3 psychiatrists who examined Mr. Benson. And there was some key testimony from a nurse who had been with him at the time that he made this big decision in December to essentially to cut his daughter and his grandkids out of
the corporate management.
Right. And she said that he agonized over this decision, that he was writing this letter, that he was agonizing over it, that it was clearly him grappling with.
And that nobody was standing over him,
Right.
which was, part of the accusation, I guess, from the children and grandchildren was that Gail Benson was exerting undue influence, which is a term that means something very specific in the law. And when the nurse said nobody was standing over him, I think the judge even said that's one of his main reasons for saying concluding as he did.
And he depended a lot upon the psychiatric evaluations, 2 of which
Correct.
found...
It was sort of a 2-to-1 split decision, I guess. Each side was allowed to name a psychiatrist, and predictably, I guess, the one that the plaintiffs named found that he was not competent, and the one that Benson named found that he was competent, and then the other one, who was picked by the 2 first psychiatrists, agreed with that he was competent.
So this doesn't settle everything, though, definitively, does it?
No. Lots of litigation.
Round 1.
Yeah.
But it sets the stage, because what it says is that his decisions about getting them out of the companies right now stands. Because they can appeal it, but assuming that it is not overturned, the decisions he makes about day-to-day management of the companies and who's allowed in and who's not allowed in, that's it. And I think it doesn't mean he's going to win ultimately, but it also means that in terms of the trusts that were set up, which allow property to be substituted in and out, provided they are of equal value, it now gets down to whether the substitutions are of equal value and not whether he was competent enough to even decide to substitute. So even if he loses on the valuation, he can always up the ante and then still make the swap.
I mean, that, I think, has always been the big question, and I always thought that was a more difficult case probably to decide. I mean, I'm no lawyer, but this seemed like this case that was decided this week seemed like a long shot, whereas that one seemed like they had a point about the valuation of the teams. The question, I think, is what is he does he have enough other stuff that he can substitute something else for that?
Right.
But in terms of control of the team, he has the voting shares, right? The
He
shares
has the
in the
voting
trust
shares,
are
and those will
non-voting
be
shares.
left to Gail. So the others might have a piece of the team,
Right.
but they won't be able to make any decisions.
Okay, well, we'll be talking about this, I'm sure, in the weeks to come. Clancy, we're going to go back over to you. You moderated a forum, right? A gubernatorial forum.
This past
Tell us
week,
about
yes. It was hosted, it was called the West Bank Governor's Luncheon. This year it was breakfast. It goes back 27 years. It's sponsored by 4 of the real heavy hitter organizations in Jefferson Parish, 3 of them anchored on the West Bank. I'm sorry, not just Jefferson Parish, but on the West Bank. The Plaquemines Association of Business and Industry, the Jefferson Chamber, the Harvey Canal Industrial Association, and the Algiers Economic Development District. And those 4 organizations pretty much have all the heavy hitters in Jefferson Parish and the West Bank, including Plaquemines and Orleans West Bank. They had a commitment from all 4 major candidates for governor to attend. They changed it to a breakfast to accommodate Senator Vitter because he said he had to go to Washington. And then Monday morning at about 11 o'clock, they got word that Senator Vitter could not attend because there was some decision or something going on in Washington involving Fort Polk, which is a shame. But, you know, if you're bi-coastal running for governor, that kind of stuff happens. It was not a total surprise. What was a little disappointing to the sponsoring organizations, however, was I say we because as a moderator I was involved in some of the discussions. The sponsors requested that Senator Vitter be asked the questions on videotape and respond to them, as he did for the PAR Forum up in Baton Rouge a few months ago. He couldn't make it live, so he let them ask him the questions, and they played his taped responses. He wouldn't do that. He said, oh, my schedule won't allow that. At the same time, he taped an 8-minute infomercial that he sent down and paid the $5,000 or so to set up the audiovisual equipment to have his Valentine card, air for the audience. So there was a little bit of, not open controversy, but there was some grumbling about that.
So how does it set the stage for the campaign as it unfolds?
I think, I wrote some time ago after Bill Cassidy's election over Mary Landrieu that knowing how Senator Vitter played such an important, even dominant, behind-the-scenes role in the strategy of that campaign, and knowing that Bill Cassidy virtually avoided all live media except for the debates, and he limited how many debates he would do. And in fact, one of his opponents, Rob Maness, called him a virtual candidate, which I thought was a very astute observation. I said, David Vitter is going to be a virtual candidate for governor, and we're seeing that now. The question is, in a Senate race, I think you can get away with a sort of a Rose Garden type strategy because everything's centered in Washington, but a governor's race is centered here in Louisiana. I don't think David Vitter's opponents, and I don't think the news media, I don't think the citizens are going to let him get away with a Rose Garden strategy and ducking debates, because I think that's what he did.
Even before Cassidy, we already saw that with Bobby Jindal. The 2 times he ran, he only did a couple of debates. He stayed away, and it didn't hurt him. It didn't hurt Cassidy. And
well, Bobby Jindal was the heavy favorite both times that he ran successfly. I mean,
why do you think Vitter's doing this?
Because he thinks he can get away with it. I think he wants to avoid, the tough questions. He wants to avoid anybody surprising him, not surprising, but asking him about the prostitution scandal. He doesn't want to be nailed down on that.
And I got to wrap this up if we're going to have time for looking ahead right now. But they are off and running, right? They're not waiting until Labor Day. They're off and running now. Okay, Errol, looking ahead.
The Voodoo, our arena football team, only have 6 games left of the season. 5 of them, unfortunately, on the road. There's 1 home game, July 18th. It may be important because there's talk that the franchise might be on the rocks, that we might be losing it, and so it might be, if you believe in arena football, if you want to support it, you might want to support that game.
Okay, Errol, thanks. Clancy.
David Vitter has a gender gap among women, not just Democratic women, but even 16 points among Republican women. Scott Angel has a commercial out aimed right at women, and Jay Darden hosted a big fundraiser meet and greet for women. So I think you're going to see the women vote be up for grabs, and the candidates who are not David Vitter are going to be scrambling to go get it.
All right, Clancy, thanks. Don.
Developers from the World Trade Center site say give them about a month, and we should have prettier pictures of what to expect and when to expect it, in a nicer construction timeline. So stay tuned.
Thanks, Don. Gordon?
Louisiana is one of 10 states that automatically considers 17-year-olds as adults when they're accused of crimes, and the state is now going to be taking a look at whether that's a good practice. This is something that's kind of fallen out of favor around the country, and we're taking a look at it now, too.
All right. Thanks, Gordon. And thank you guys for being here. Thank you all for watching us, and we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.